So you've probably heard that children are so much better when it comes to learning languages. I often hear people tell me that they wished that they had started learning a new language earlier because supposedly they've now gotten too old to learn languages. And I mean, if they've gotten too old, then of course now they're not able to learn language. Now, there are a few reasons why people tend to believe that this is a myth, and yes, it is a myth. So, to explain this, I would like to use an example that I encountered at my old job. So, we had a couple of kids that were, well, they were challenging, but one of those kids, let's just call him John. So, John, he was really certain of himself, or at least he acted like it was, and he was really self-centered. But one of the things that meant was that, for instance, when we were having meetings, or if we were discussing things that he wasn't necessarily supposed to hear, he would at times come up to us and sort of just decide that he was going to be part of this conversation. Whether he knew what we were talking about, whether it was something that he actually needed to know or not, he would at times simply decide that, okay, I am going to be part of this conversation. Now, this is one advantage that kids have. Kids are likely to venture into any sort of conversation without really caring about whether or not it's appropriate for them, whether or not they actually know what we're talking about. And this is incredibly useful when it comes to learning a language, because kids, they're not afraid to fail. Me, on the other hand, or probably you yourself as well, I would spend probably close to 6 months when I initially started learning Portuguese before I started using it with anyone. I would study on my own, and I would be super afraid to speak. Now, I started chatting super early, but I used a lot of Google Translate in the beginning, and that's a great way to learn, but actually going in and speaking, I mean, that was super difficult. But if you are able to force yourself into these sort of maybe uncomfortable situations, then you're likely to find that, okay, I'm learning a lot from this. Now, I had this very experience myself when I was visiting my girlfriend in Brazil, where, I mean, we were, for instance, or at a beach, and I mean, we were ordering some stuff, and my girlfriend forced me to order things, basically just to challenge me. Now, I have spent a lot of time talking to her, talking to other people online, and such, but I'm not actually too used to buying stuff, talking to people in stores and such, and making small talk. Those are things that I'm not too used to, and that meant that I was making a lot of mistakes, or at least some mistakes. Not too many. I'm actually quite happy with myself when it comes to that. But I had to be open to making mistakes, open to learn from my mistakes in order for me to improve. But if you never make those mistakes, then it's going to be a whole lot more difficult for you to actually learn these things. So I would suggest trying to force yourself into situations where you don't have the vocabulary. Just make sure that when you do, don't be cocky. So don't act like you own the place, but just try, and people are most likely going to be patient with you and actually teach you what you're trying to learn. So another thing is, children, they have a lot of time when it comes to learning a language, and as adults, we don't have that time, especially when we're busy doing stuff like going to work. Especially if you don't live in a country where they speak the language that you're trying to learn, then yeah, it can be challenging finding enough time. But try to find time to sit down. I've mentioned it several times before, but try to find time to sit down and talk to several people, have conversations with several people, especially if you're living in different time zones. They're likely to be busy when you're free, and so on, like vice versa. But if you have more people that you're talking to, then you're more likely to have at least one person that's free for you to talk to. And I mean, you'll hear At least I've heard this when it comes to people from Brazil trying to learn English or trying to learn Norwegian. They often complain about how there aren't enough conversation partners for them. One of the things that I think that people should stop doing is that they should stop only talking to people that are trying to learn your native language or a language that you're familiar with. If I was trying to learn English all over again, then there is no way I would go out trying to find people that already spoke English trying to learn Norwegian. There's no way I would do that. What I would instead do is I would start playing video games. I would start talking to people while playing video games. I would start using voice chat while playing video games. Those are the ways that you actually find people that speak that language. When I was visiting Brazil, for instance, I was playing a bit of a game called TFT. It's an online game. You don't necessarily have to interact with others, but you have the opportunity to interact with others. And if I was trying to learn Portuguese and I was starting off, I'm still trying to learn Portuguese, but if I was trying and starting off with learning Portuguese, then using a video game that I'm familiar with, where I'm likely to find people that already speak the language, they're not trying to learn English or they're not trying to learn Norwegian, then that just means that I have more time to study Portuguese. And yeah, if you can't find people that are native speakers at all, not just speakers that aren't trying to learn new language or vice versa, but if you can't find speakers that speak your target language, then what I would suggest is, especially for people in Brazil, for instance, there are a ton of Brazilians trying to learn English. I don't see the problem in simply forcing yourself to speak English with them. So, for instance, you probably have several friends trying to learn English. Why not just speak English with them? That would make it so much easier for you to find conversation partners. And if there's anything that you're curious about, if there's anything that you don't know, but your conversation partner already knows, then he can explain to you. And if there's anything that you're both curious about, then, just look it up and you're most likely going to learn it a lot quicker because it's something that you're actually curious about. If you don't have anyone to practice with IRL either, like face-to-face in real life, or any friends online that you could speak to, then actually what I would suggest is I would suggest using either ChatGPT or using the Snapchat's AI and just start talking to it in the language that you're trying to learn. It will respond in that language and you can have a decent conversation. Like, it's that simple. Both of those are free. I used both of them to look up research articles and stuff like that as well. And it frequently suggests me articles in Portuguese if I ask it in Portuguese, or if I ask it in Norwegian, then it's likely to suggest research articles written in Norwegian. Not that there are too many, because most Norwegian researchers, they write in English, but those are other options if you don't have any friends at all to talk to. Now, if you suddenly start speaking to a lot of people, then, that's going to take up a lot of time, and I would just like to mention that there is one thing that you should always keep in mind when you start studying a lot more than you're used to, and that is that you should take frequent breaks. When you're learning a lot, it can be very overwhelming. I know that I was definitely worried about that when I was going to Brazil. I just worried that I would be too exhausted, it would be too overwhelming. But if you're doing that, like if you're studying at home and you find that it becomes too overwhelming, then stop, take a break, and do something else, and then return to it. Your head needs time to adjust to the input that you're getting. And by giving it time, you also get the time needed for you to start understanding the things that you're actually learning, and it becomes solid knowledge instead of just something in your short-term memory. Now, if you still want to continue studying, but you find that you're exhausted, then what I would suggest is I would have a couple of activities that that don't strain you too much, where you're able to do them almost passively. For me, that would be watching something like Pokemon, which I did. I would watch that instead of a series made for adults. I'm likely to understand basically everything if I'm watching Pokemon, but I mean, I would still maybe learn a word or two, but it would be a whole lot easier for me to just sit there passively watching Pokemon in Portuguese than it would be for me to watch a series made for adults. Now, I might really enjoy watching those adult series, but if I really need a break, then I'm always going to choose something that is easy for me to watch, easy for me to understand. Those were my tips and just general things for you to consider that you might not have realized were holding you back from actually learning the language that you want. Alright, as always, best of luck with your studies and neck out.